Tuesday, January 12th, 1909. I was too much engrossed with finishing the Florentine frame and welcoming Catherine Dreier to London to write in this on New Year's Day, but I will take up the old habit of review. First, as to 1907 and what it brought, I saw the year in at Lady Lewis's party, taken to dinner by Henry James and to supper by John Sargent. James Barry asked me to come and talk over my play Votes for Women. I do, also with George Bernard Shaw and his wife. I went to Germany on March 4th to see the Lohmans after finishing the play Votes for Women, which was then produced early in April. A success of esteem. I share the small financial results with the WSPU and the Older Suffrage Society. I am tired out with London and suffrage demands. I go to Woldingham on April 18th during a run of Votes for Women. I like it so well I decide to give up my flat as soon as practicable. Catherine Dreier comes over from Paris to see me. I went to Manchester in June for Mrs. Pankhurst's presentation. Under the Southern Cross, the first story I ever wrote, was published in New York in June. I go to Roundton for Elsa Bell's wedding, and all the while since, coming first to Blythe, I work at writing The Convert, published October 17th. This is the book form of my play. Mrs. Pankhurst and Christabel journeyed down here to get me to do this and that, and after my bicycle accident, Mrs. Pankhurst comes at the time of the Bellington split to get me to go on the WSPU committee. Do this for us. I, at last, agree. Welcome to the Elizabeth Robbins Diary podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Kaler. In commemoration of the 100th anniversary of women obtaining the right to vote in the United States, I wrote a course on how the literary arts advance women's suffrage. I taught the class in the summers of 2019 and 2020 at Chautauqua Institution. If you don't know about Chautauqua, I like to describe it as a Disney World for intellectuals. Located in New York, it's a place where participants spend their days feeding their mind and spirit on lectures, music, and stimulating debate. Constructed in the 18 and 1900s, you are surrounded by stunning historic structures, brick streets, and brilliant people. Experts from around the globe are brought in the massive amphitheater to address the Chautauquans. In fact, Raymond Robbins spoke there at least twice, once on labor unions and grafting, and once on why we should outlaw war. I didn't speak on the big stage like Raymond, but in one of the many classrooms found on the property. Over the course of this podcast, we'll cover other aspects of Elizabeth's involvement in the suffrage movement, including why she is depicted in a new graphic novel as an intimidating jiu-jitsu suffragette. But for this episode, we're going to focus on her role as president of the Women Writers' Suffrage League. For more than half a century, women in the UK and US had been petitioning, marching, protesting for the right to vote. In 1906, frustrated by their inability to make a case to wealthy women who would not attend the suffrage street rallies, the British WSPU, or Women's Social and Political Union, commissioned Elizabeth to write a suffrage play that would be performed on stage. They decided if the wealthy women wouldn't come to them, they'd go to them at the theater. The international success of Elizabeth's play, which she titled Votes for Women, showed the WSPU they had a powerful new tool at their disposal that the governments could not control. Literature. Elizabeth and others decided to organize their efforts to flood the market with writings about suffrage. Novels, plays, newspaper articles, short stories, poems, every form of literature became part of their arsenal. Thus was the Women Writers' Suffrage League formed, and Elizabeth became the president. Within 10 years, legislation in both the U.S. and U.K. came forward regarding women's suffrage. The power of the pen was confirmed, and today we're going to give Elizabeth the credit she deserves for fostering it. As I studied the women's suffrage movement, I realized that the fight for the vote was actually about fighting for personhood. In many places, a married woman could not own property or have a bank account, had no rights to make decisions for her children, and was barred from many professions. Though labor unions were doing pretty well by the early 1900s, women were rarely allowed to join them, so did not receive their benefits or protections. They did pay taxes on any earnings they received, but did not have representation, the whole taxation without representation thing. William Henry Margetson created a stunning logo for the League. It is a picture of Lady Justice, blindfolded, with a woman on her knees clinging to Lady Justice's dress, while a black hooded person with the words "prejudice" on his belt tries to pull the woman away. The League grew quickly. Members had to be a published author, but could be male or female, and had to commit to publishing something about suffrage. They quickly boasted over 100 members who worked to flush the market with suffrage literature. The WWSL's objective was, quote, to obtain the vote for women on the same terms as it is or may be granted to men. Its methods are those proper to writers, the use of the pen, end quote. Elizabeth explained her reason behind the League in her book, Waystations. She wrote, "The magnificent platform work being done from various centers must be supplemented and further spread about the world through the medium of the written word. I don't mean by frankly propagandist writing, though I am the last to deny the importance of that, but even more valuable is, I think, the spirit with which both men and women writers are able in 1,000 ways to illustrate and justify. My complaint is that not enough has been made of such traces as history preserves of the significant lives lived by women. The great adventure is before her. Your great adventure is to report her faithfully, so that her children's children reading her story shall be lifted up, proud and full of hope. Of such stuff they shall say, our mothers were, sweethearts and wives, yes, and other things besides, leaders, discoverers, militants, fighting every form of wrong." That's very beautifully written, but what did it mean, practically speaking? How does a poem about a woman convince people she should be invited to the ballot box? Elizabeth set the tone with her own very first piece of suffrage literature, Votes for Women. It's a play in 3 acts. The second act is literally a recreation of a suffrage rally. Do you see what she's doing there? The women in the audience wouldn't come to the street rallies, so she recreates a street rally in the theater. It's brilliant. It called for like 50 people on the stage, heckling the speaker and booing and side conversations, utter chaos, just like a real rally. But the first and third act take place in the parlor of a wealthy family, and the conversations are much more subtle. They address women's personhood without whacking you over the head with it. Elizabeth wrote it in a way that led you to think about the roles of women and men, both in society and in personal relationships. It was subtle enough that the audience didn't feel preached to, but aggressive enough that they couldn't miss the point. Following the success of Votes for Women, Elizabeth took the play and expanded it into a novel to tell the backstory of the heroine, Vida, again making the humanity of Vida the focus instead of her fight for the right to vote. Other writers took Elizabeth's lead. Let's read some examples written by other WWSL members during this time. Author Alice Dorr Miller wrote over 300 poems, which she then put in a collection entitled Are Women People? Here is one of my favorites of her satire pieces. It is titled Our Own 12 Anti-Suffragist Reasons. Number 1, because no woman will leave her domestic duties to vote. Number 2, because no woman who may vote will attend to her domestic duties. Number 3, because it will make dissension between husband and wife. And number 4, because every woman will vote as her husband tells her to. Number 5, because bad women will corrupt politics. Number 6, because politics will corrupt women. Number 7, because women have no power to organize. And number 8, because women will form a solid party and outvote men. 9, because men and women are so different that they must stick to different duties. 10, because men and women are so much alike that men with 1 vote each can represent their own views and ours too. Number 11, because women cannot use force. And 12, because the militants did use force. Satire was also used in parlor plays. These were intended as entertainment in the home and not for public performance. This is an excerpt from An Anti-Suffrage Monologue by Marie Jenny Howe. Please do not think of me as old-fashioned. I pride myself on being a modern, up-to-date woman. I believe in all kinds of broad-mindedness. Only I do not believe in women's suffrage, because to do that would be to deny my sex. Women's suffrage is the reform against nature. Look at these ladies sitting on the platform, observe their physical inability, their mental disability, their spiritual instability, and general debility. Could they walk up to the ballot box, mark a ballot, and drop it in? Obviously not. Let us grant for the sake of argument that they could mark a ballot. But then could they drop it in? Oh no, all nature is against it. The laws of man cry out against it. The voice of God cries out against it. And so do I. Enfranchisement is what makes a man. Disenfranchisement is what makes a woman woman. If women were enfranchised, every man would be just like every woman, and every woman would be just like every man. There would be no difference between them. And don't you think this would rob life of just a little of its poetry and romance? Man must remain man. Woman must remain woman. If man goes over and tries to be like woman, if woman goes over and tries to be like man, it will become so very confusing and so difficult to explain to our children. Let us take a practical example. If a woman puts on a man's coat and trousers, takes a man's cane and hat and cigar, and goes out onto the street, what will happen to her? She will be arrested and thrown into jail. Then why not stay at home? I know you begin to see how strongly I feel on this subject, but I have some reasons as well. The reasons are based on logic. Of course, I am not logical. I am a creature of impulse, instinct, and intuition, and I glory in it. But I know that these reasons are based on logic because I have culled them from the men who it is my privilege to know. My first argument against suffrage is that women would not use it if they had it. You couldn't drive them to the polls. My second argument is, if women were enfranchised, they would neglect their homes, desert their families, and spend all their time at the polls. You may tell me that the polls are only open once a year, but I know women. They are creatures of habit. If you let them go to the polls once a year, they will hang round the polls all the rest of the time. Although sarcasm and satire were popular, it wasn't the only tactic. Sometimes writers chose to focus on the very real struggles women faced as a result of their lack of rights or protections. The Inferior Woman by Sui Sin Far is an example of the many pieces that tackled prejudice and abuses suffered by immigrants in the era, as does Fanny herself by Edna Ferber. Here's some examples. Representation by Alice Dorr Miller. Subtitled, My Wife is Against Suffrage, and That Settles Me, Vice President Marshall. My wife dislikes the income tax, and so I cannot pay it. She thinks that golf all interest lacks, and now I never play it. She is opposed to tolls repeal, though why I cannot say. But women's duty is to feel, and man's is to obey. President Wilson was anti-suffrage, so women began to picket the White House. Here's where the literature aspect comes in. They would read his speeches and find things Wilson had said that contradicted his anti-suffrage stance. Then they'd take the excerpt of that speech and make it into massive banners that everyone could read as they passed by. And presumably Wilson could read them from his office in the White House. One banner quoted Wilson from his war message delivered on April 2, 1917. We shall fight for the things which we have always carried nearest in our hearts, for democracy, for the right of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their own government. Their approach to politicians varied from using their own words against them to mocking them to heartfelt pleas. One of the most creative appeals came in the U.S. in 1916 when the National Women's Party members made over 1,000 individual valentines and gave them to politicians. Valentine creators reasoned, we've tried reasoning, eloquence of the soapbox, cart tail, and back of the automobile variety, and we hope that rhymes may influence the politicians where the other forces did not. This wasn't the only time they tried to reinforce their femininity. A slew of suffrage cookbooks were published. Great recipes and fundraising were secondary benefits. The primary goal was to reassure men that women would continue to cook and care for them even if they were able to vote. My favorite suffrage cookbook, entitled The Original Suffrage Cookbook, was published in 1915 in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It included recipes from suffragists like Jane Addams, Alva Belmont, and Carrie Chapman Catt, as well as male supporters Jack London and California Governor Hiram Johnson. Most fun of all is the inclusion of Elizabeth's sister-in-law, Margaret Robbins. Margaret's recipe for potato balls recommended eating them with stewed dry fruits cooked together, prunes, apricots, apples. I haven't tried it yet, but it's on my to-do list. We don't have time for novel reading, but check out Virginia Woolf's Night and Day and works by Evelyn Sharp if you'd like to read something in full. One of my favorite suffrage novels, entitled The Sturdy Oak, is a composite novel. 14 famous authors wrote one chapter each of the story, with each writer doing what they liked with the story as it came to them. Reading that can send one on a deep dive into all their other work, which explains how I am still reading suffrage literature 4 years after teaching my first Chautauqua course on the subject. Suffrage rights would begin to be granted for women in 1918 in England and in 1920 in the United States, and the Women's Writers' Suffrage League would be dissolved. Elizabeth would then turn her attention to other social battles, but that is a story for another podcast. On the next episode of the Elizabeth Robbins Diary podcast, we will talk about Elizabeth's baby brother Raymond and the wild and almost unbelievable life he lived. From gold mining in Alaska to presidential appointments in the White House, and from fighting Union thugs to getting on Al Capone's hit list, Raymond's life was never dull. Thank you for listening to the Elizabeth Robbins Diary podcast, a creation and production of Brooksville Main Street, a nonprofit focused on economic redevelopment through historic preservation and placemaking. The podcast is made possible with the help of a generous grant from Florida Humanities. Would you please consider following and rating the podcast? By following us, you'll be sure not to miss an episode, and rating is a super helpful way to help us spread the word and support all the hard work of the following people. Leif Thomason of Odd Life Studios produced this content as well as editing, mixing, and mastering it. Tom and Patria Dye opened Profound Revelation Studios in downtown Brooksville, allowing us to create this content right in the heart of our city. The docents of the Chinsegut Hill Historic Site and Andrea Reed generously provided research support and advice. The members of the Women's Writers' Suffrage League for each of their contributions to our world of literature. Barry Meindl of DeBar Design created our lovely graphics. Elisa Babor of Roots Creative Co. designed an amazing website and social media. Randy Olson of Live Oak Theater wrote and performed our theme song, Time is Whispering. Fales Library of New York University for access to Elizabeth's collection. Those resources are quoted with the kind permission of Independent Age, a registered charity number 210729. Find out more about them at www.independentage.org. And of course, Elizabeth Robbins, WWSL President and women's suffrage apologist, for helping society and the individuals in it officially recognize the personhood of women. I'll end the episode with this quote from Elizabeth's diary from April 13th on 1911 regarding census paperwork she was supposed to fill out. I wrote across the census paper, "The occupier of this house will be ready to give the desired information as soon as the government recognizes women as responsible citizens."